Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ed Rainbow. Thank you so much for being with me today. How are you?
Hi, Lewis. Yeah, thanks very much for having us on. I'm not too bad today. Like I was just saying before, just getting over a bit of a cold.
Amazing.
But, life's okay.
As I always like to start this with, what, in your own words, makes you a man?
So that's a really interesting question now. I've joined a men's circle recently to explore stuff like this. And I've realised it's actually quite, the more you look at this kind of question, it's actually quite complicated. What makes you what is being a man for me? And, on some level, there's stuff, isn't it? Behavioural stuff. So this is like who I am, like helping others, being thoughtful, being a good dad to my daughters, or like a loving husband, this kind of thing, or being, I don't know, intelligent, being helpful to other people, being creative, being physical, playing, badminton, cycling, things like this, being outdoors. There's this sort of stuff. So that's a kind of like, this is how I perceive myself, or maybe others might perceive me. And then I was thinking, but I'm not always like that though. So I was sort of thinking, what am I like when I'm overloaded or life's not going so good? And I can be quite short. I can avoid my family. I can get a bit fixated on things, which isn't necessarily healthy. I can sort of adopt this like plow on, just carry on kind of attitude. I can become really paranoid. So I guess all of this is part of being me, part of being a man. And it's all there. And it's really interesting. It's very complicated. I feel in some way a bit conflicted even answering the question as well, like why are these things male? I don't think necessarily any of them you could equally apply them to another female or whatever. So that's just some initial thoughts on that. I mean, what's your take on it?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think it opens up so many avenues, so many thought processes. I really liked your honest answer to there, where you sort of said the good things, which the majority of guests will say, but you very kindly sort of shared the other side of it. I think a lot of men will feel that happen to them as well, and I think it is part of it. The reason that I ask it is because it's just such a great question to get started. I think it really opens up this conversation, and it allows people to just go, this is a different man. This is great. I want to hear this side of things. And the more I ask that question, I hope people start to ask it themselves as well, because I think it's changed a lot. And you touched on it a little bit. I think what is a man now is not what was defined as a man. And I think that's something that's really important to me, and it's something that I want to sort of encourage people to have that conversation openly.
Absolutely. And I think there's a real importance to it, actually. So I guess one of the themes, I guess we'll cover this in more detail, is often I find, and this is personally, but I think this is a sort of men generally kind of thing, drift kind of through life. Kind of you do things because of external pressures or what you've been kind of encouraged to do as a kid or whatever. And invariably you hit a point where stuff is just very jarring. And there's I suppose personally, this was getting very burnt out. This was, being very suicidal, not being able to work, just being a bit of a wreck of a human being, really. And but what was very helpful for that point for me, and this is recognizing that is actually a point where life is actually starting. You get a chance to really consider who you are, what's important to you, what you want your life to genuinely be like. And that list I sort of reeled off at the beginning about what what's a man, or what am I as a man. I think I would have given you a very different list. I think a few years ago I would have said it's just about earning money, providing for your family, helping. I'm a GP by training, so helping other people. That's about it. That's probably how I would have viewed my life then. I think, and that's how I did view my life. So, yeah, I really kind of agree with that sort of stepping out and questioning, what is it to be a man? What is it to be yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's essentially what it is. But we're men, and I think we spoke about this, that men don't really talk as much. And if we frame the question in a way that's really simple, which is,
Yeah.
what is you as a man, it should open a lot more conversations.
I
What
think so.
what I'd love to start talking about, if that's okay, is what you sort of alluded to there. So, how did you find yourself in this space? What was the story? What's happened to you?
Yeah, a lot. is the honest answer. So if we go back 5 years, so that's it's pre-COVID. So
Yeah.
imagine that. So as I say, actually when people sort of said, when friends said, "Oh, how's life going?" or whatever, I could say, "Oh, it's great," and you could reel off the "it's great" kind of things. I was a partner at a very successful general practice. I was, earning a good amount of money. I had got a nice wife and 2 lovely daughters and a nice house, and go on nice holidays. I was doing a master's at the time. I had a nice job at the medical school as well, and so all this kind of external listing of how everything was fine, and what was actually going on was quite different. So I was increasingly, I don't know, just tired. It was just taking me longer to do the work that I would have done in a quicker amount of time before. And then I got, there was the odd little error kind of crept in. Nothing drastic and nothing that hurt anyone. But, colleagues would just occasionally sort of say, "Oh, did you mean to do this?" I was like, "Oh, no, that's that kind of thing." Then I was just getting home really in a bit of a foul mood. So my wife was some of the time she was just had the kids, it was 12-hour days or whatever. As a GP said, she had the kids were quite young at that point. So and just being quite annoyed and irritated by her and by my children, which again is not, I couldn't really put my finger on why. Or even more sort of odd was just sort of running out of the house. Just I had to kind of get out of somehow.
Yeah.
My body just and then there was a bit of I didn't define myself as a sort of heavy drinker, but Fridays and Saturdays it'd be 3 beers or something like this each night at home, or usually at home, interestingly. So the socialising kind of element of going to the pub had sort of dropped out with this. And then I really was, I used to cycle back. It was about 7 miles away to practice, so I used to cycle back, which was a good de-stressor. But as I was cycling home, increasingly, I just used to get thoughts like, wouldn't it just be easier just to swerve into the other side of the road and have be hit by a car? And through all of this, I didn't really ever stop to think, this isn't right. This isn't like so somehow what there was no sort of consideration of the path or the things that were happening. And reflecting back and saying that, it's still quite upsetting actually, sort of saying that now. And reflecting back, it's quite kind of alarming how that all sort of crept up slowly over probably a year or two. Now I got very lucky, because I remember one Saturday morning I was so exhausted I just couldn't. I physically couldn't move. I was so just broken, and I think I can't. And my memory's a bit vague about all of this. I think either I just didn't go to work, or I phoned up the manager and just said, "Look, there's something really wrong here." And I went and sought some help. I was lucky. So the NHS has a health service for healthcare practitioners that runs a bit behind the scenes, called Practitioner Health. So if anyone in the sort of GP sphere is listening, or dentists or things like this, it exists, and it had basically it was set up because people there's a recognition that doctors hid all this stuff basically, and self-medicated a lot of the time with prescription meds or alcohol or whatever. And but I felt like I could approach that and use that. So looking back, it looked safe. It looked like you're not going to lose your job. No one's going to report you anywhere. Because I was quite sort of paranoid at the time. So I approached, and they basically said, they were very, very kind. And they said, basically, you're severely depressed, severely anxious, and you're really burnt out from working. And I found that very, very hard to accept. I was to say, you're talking about someone else, right? You recognise the stereotype. And I used to. It sounds crazy. It was about a third of general practice appointments are mental health related. So I remember having appointments where I was thinking oh, for God's sake, you're stop complaining or whatever. And then, which I never said that. I never said that. And then I had ones where they were saying, I was like, actually, I'm worse than you are about this, but again, it didn't do anything about it. So anyway, I took time off, and then I felt incredibly guilty, and I felt like a failure, because you have all these people who dependent on you, or so you perceive, or so I perceived at the time. But what I noticed over time, I took quite a few months off actually. It was actually that I started to feel better.
Yeah. And
I then started to explore. So what the doctor I saw actually was, I said, actually, I don't want to go on antidepressant tablets. So he said, do you want to go on? I said, no, I don't. I wasn't very convinced they worked, basically, from seeing them in action, from prescribing to people. And I said, no, I don't really want to do that. And they said, well, why don't you look at, there's this guy, Rangan Chatterjee, he does a podcast and has some books. And I had a look at his stuff. I was like, okay, right, so you can change stuff. So I started to, make sure I got enough sleep and ate healthily, and made sure I exercised enough, and just sort of simple stuff that everyone knows that you're meant to do, yeah. But it's harder to do in reality for a variety of reasons. So I started to do that, and then I started to get better, which was was good. And I actually reached a point where I was like, oh, actually, I feel better now than I have done at any point as an adult.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. That sort of realization, like, oh, this is interesting. You don't have to be in pain or paranoid or, or like fed up about everything. And that was quite a revelation. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Or I used to have like loads of muscle cramps and headaches, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, that's gone. So that was the first sort of bit, I guess. I suppose it would be useful to well add a little bit more, and then we'll. Or do you want to delve into that a bit more first?
I want to pick up on a few points that I think will be very useful. It's great to hear from a doctor that all of these things that that people get told to do work. Firstly, but also that they are. Yes. It is a case of like actively making an effort to do them. You said life gets in the way, and it's really tough. So. I think it's nice to hear that it's still hard to do, but like people should know that it does work and it's an effort. And then I guess
carry on. Yeah, carry on, Liz.
I wanted to finally touch on the sort of the first bit, which was the pressure of wanting to provide and feeling that you need to provide. And I like using this term a lot, like keeping up with the Joneses, shall we say? Like, where do you think that stemmed from?
Yeah, great question. So it's taken me a long time to pick this apart. What I think it all comes basically from fear and shame, and learning that that's how you should be driven by those things. So I'll give you some examples. So so that's one example. So at school, so when I went to a boys' sort of private high school, and I'm not from a well-off family at all. We got there was a scheme sort of paying for it essentially. So it's very out of place, and there was a degree of, it wasn't horrendous, but there was a degree of bullying that went on. And one of the things was occasionally someone would come up behind me and like hit me with a stick or something like this, right? And the lesson that I learned there was basically someone might attack you at any point. Keep your head down, stay anonymous. And I only really realized that I'd learned that lesson maybe the last year or two. So, and a lot of sort of how I'd got through life was basically being driven by just keep your head down, keep going. Don't stand out, that kind of thing. So that was one thing. And then another thing was, so my dad died when I was 16. I came home from school one day, and there was an ambulance outside the door, and basically he'd had a heart attack, and he was actually unemployed at the time. So he'd worked in a bank as a bank clerk for about 20 odd years, and they were basically replacing all the full-time staff with part-time roles, and they made him redundant. But so the lesson, so he maybe got redundant, and then he had a heart attack and died. And subsequently, I've learned that being the stress, the being unemployed, lonely, all these kind of things that drive stress in our body, and you can have a heart attack as a result. So, but the lesson I learned again was, you've got to have lots of money, because otherwise you're stuffed, and you've got to have a job where people don't sack you. So, that was a sort of what drove me into medicine, was a sort of combination of all of these things. Really was, if you've got if you're sort of in a position of responsibility, if you've got lots of money, then you're there, and if you sort of don't stick out too much, then you're fine. So just do all of that. But none of that was ever said. It was just all assumed. And in a sense, that's not a bad thing. So it helped carry me to, through life or whatever. But equally, it was actually quite a harmful kind of mindset, because I took on more and more jobs to earn more money, despite being a GP. There's this sort of fear, I don't have enough money, I'll just get another 10 grand. I'll just take on this role. Yeah. And that all sort of built up. So Yeah, I think that's the basic. The basic thing is fear, it's shame, it's not stopping to consider. That's the real answer. And once you do stop to consider, you can tell yourself a different story, basically. So, what's your take on all of this, Lewis? I mean, you
Yeah, I
went
mean,
quite a lot
like
through.
it's sort of a similar vibe. I was like always tried to earn as much money as possible. I think that was like a goal of mine. I don't
Mm,
really know why or where it came from. Like I wasn't poor growing up or anything like that, and
mm,
I was like very middle of the road. Um, my first role out of uni was commission based solely. I think that had a
mm,
huge impact on it. It was in finance. I think that also is quite a toxic world, even
mm,
still, um, and is very like cutthroat and very like competitive.
mm,
I've naturally just been competitive my whole life. Like
mm.
I can't do I can do stuff for fun. That's a lie, but there's there's always going to be a competitive element to it. I don't know
Yeah.
why. I don't know how. Even if the other person doesn't realize there's one, there is to me, um, which is fine. So I think that's sort of where my mindset was with it,
Yeah.
and I my story, I sort of lost all that and was sort of left without my business and what I was doing. So I was sort of, and when it was all gone, it was like, okay, now what? And it was it could have been just a rebuild from a financial point of view and gone again, but I was in a really bad place and I decided to look at other avenues and sort of change
Mm,
my ethos. And like I think my final point on this is that money isn't bad. Earning money isn't bad. Having a drive for money isn't bad. But when it engulfs you and it's your only goal,
mm.
then I feel it's almost an addiction, and that an element of a problem there that is deeper
Yeah.
rooted.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. 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 This
is
is,
that
I recognise it's never, it's never enough. I will earn more this year, but I could earn more still. But it's a sort of thoughtless
yeah,
um, acquisition. And you're right. You need money to get by. And there's lots of people that suffer through poverty in this country, and so it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing, isn't it?
yeah,
Well, there's an interesting book called Your Money or Your Life. I can't remember the author's name now, but essentially it's the idea. It's a mindful approach to money. It's
I'll check that out.
what do you need your money for?
Yeah,
Yeah, what do it's a good route. What do you need your money for? Do you genuinely need the keeping up with the Joneses, as you say? And
yeah,
how do you go about being more congruent with your money? So yeah.
yeah. Nice. I'll definitely check that out. And then, sort of touching on your story again, you sort of reached out to for support.
Hmm.
And there was an interesting thing that you said there. You didn't feel judged, or you didn't feel that there was any pressure to have that conversation with those people.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I was quite fortunate for that actually to be in place. So the doctor was always a GP who had an interest in this sort of area, and yeah, they were just interested in really helping me. Really, I think that was their motivation. I mean, I guess like my kind of motivation for helping other people is to say it's sort of an intrinsic driver or whatever. So they were very helpful because I think what was useful, and this is what I try and do with other people. I've always done as a GP, and when I do this sort of work with men now, it's you need to be on a level with the other person. So the traditional doctor model is the doctor knows everything,
Yeah,
and the patient is somehow underneath them, and you just do what you're told, kind of thing. And there's various problems with that, and but I think some of it relates to ego and all this kind of stuff of the doctor, and slightly precious kind of thing. But actually, anyone can go and look up the information that you need to know now about anything very straightforwardly, and they can come to their own conclusions about what is going on with them. And then it just needs to be a kind of sensible discussion, right, about as partners, really. Anyhow, that's an aside. So they were very helpful. They suggested things that I was in agreement with, essentially. So it's like saying not the tablets, but actually exercise, eat healthily, get enough sleep, etc. And they just wanted me to get better, really. So it was very helpful. They also arranged some talking therapy. I guess that's probably useful to touch a bit of cognitive behavioural therapy, which gave me a bit of insight into a bit more the self insight kind of world. It was extremely helpful.
Yeah, the reason I say that is because I speak to a lot of men, and that is one of their concerns is that initial outreach. And it was interesting that you said the traditional doctor role is above and below, and I feel that is felt by a lot of men, and I think no matter what that is. And I've also heard in corporations as well, like from HR managers and stuff like that they'll put stuff in place, but they're still a little bit paranoid that it might get back to the boss, even though a third-party company that's being paid for. And that's really interesting because there's no way legally in this country that would even ever happen. But the fact that that's the fear, and that's one of the drawbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely. I'd agree. So I call this the DTs. So there's reasons men are reluctant to seek help, basically, and there can be any number of these. But 2Ds, so doctors, or therapists, kind of in the sort of workplace thing. So for some men, that's just off-putting. I'm not going to go and see a doctor because second D, diagnosis, they're going to tell me there's something wrong with me, and this clashes with the masculinity thing. So if you're the sort of traditional view is I'm a man, I know I know everything. It sounds a bit sort of odd to say, but I there's nothing wrong with me, this kind of stuff, right? So why would I even enter into this process of considering, so there's that. And then there's 3 T's. So tablets, which put me off, but I think put a lot of men off, because it fits with the thing. Talking therapy, again, men can be very good at talking, but the idea of going to see someone who you don't know, who's sort of labeling, who there's a label of something wrong with you, can be so that initial step can be really challenging. And time off work is hugely demasculating, I guess. I think that's a really big problem, because if you're not working, and we touched on this, like what is a man? If you're not working, that's a real challenge to masculinity. I think that's a real challenge to what is a man in our kind of societal sort of construct. So, to some degree, the solutions we have on offer, the sort of mainstream ones, the work-related ones, often present problems, and it can. I think we can be a bit reluctant to think about that's an issue per se. The help we offer is not the right help.
Yeah, that's. I think that's I didn't seek any help. I self Googled and went down that route because I like my partner at the time was, you need to see someone, and I was like, I don't.
Yeah.
And like it's something that I still I now consider, and I have friends that have seeked it and said it's the best thing ever. They said speaking to a stranger is the easiest thing in the world. But it's now I consider it, but I had to get there on my own to even now consider it an option. Which
exactly. See, what would do you recall any sort of barriers, or is it just I'm just going to sort this out? It's just another thing I have to sort out, so I'm just going to sort it out, kind of thing.
Yeah. So
what was it for you?
Yeah, it really was that, because the position that I was in was I essentially had lost my purpose as a man at that time. Like
Mm.
the business that I was working on essentially frittered out into nothing, had cost me a lot of money. I was no longer living in London. I'd moved from London back here just after COVID. COVID was huge pressure for me. I was trying to keep people employed and like,
Mm.
yeah, some people had very relaxed COVIDs. I definitely didn't. And yeah, it just sort of all ended and I was just like left with nothing. And then the suggestion was to go and speak to someone. So it was like,
Mm.
well, I've got nothing. So let me try and do something. And that was my approach to it, was like, how do I get out of this? And it was like as simple as 10,000 steps, eating healthy. Like
Mm.
I have a photo. It's about 2 years ago now that it was like where I took this photo, and I was like, you can see I'm white. Some of the first episodes of
Mm.
this, well, I'm like, I'm skinny, but I'm like, I'm fat, and I'm not in any shape whatsoever. And yeah, I just made that change, and that was the start of it.
Mm.
And then
Mm.
I started doing these podcasts and talking to people. That made me feel better that people were going through the same
Yeah.
stuff. Like it's
Yeah.
you think you're alone, so that was good, and that was get sort of my therapy. It was quite cathartic doing that, and
Mm.
then I got into a position where I felt better and that I could start doing other things. And like I say, now it's something that I consider, and it's something that I may do in the future. I started watching stuff on like mentality, so like sports mentality
Mm.
people sort of like
Mm.
talk
Mm.
to high performing athletes about that sort of that sort of thing. So that's interesting. I guess that's a form of therapy, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that's something that I want to consider, because that's the difference between getting higher and moving forward, or sort of staying at the same level, I guess. And as I said,
Yeah.
I am still competitive in that field, I guess, and I want to improve on that. So yeah, that's my
Great.
view on
Great. No, that's. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's great that that's you started that sort of upward spiral that you kind of described through relatively straightforward things, sort of taking the steps, looking after yourself better, this kind of stuff. And then it's interesting, what starts to happen is you start to generate a bit of momentum. Interestingly, physiologically, your body, you're like if you once you start doing that stuff, your testosterone level starts to come up and your dopamine level starts. You got to feel better,
yeah.
because there's more of these sort of hormones kind of around, and then you get this kind of virtuous kind of loop occurring. But what I would say is interesting. I guess I've got two thoughts about sort of counselling or talking. So it's interesting, as you say, having conversations is therapeutic, right? So this I'm really glad that you kind of do this podcast. I think it's a great thing. But actually, probably the person who benefits most is probably you from the whole thing, because you're the one having the conversations all the time.
Yeah.
But actually, I hope the sort of audience, just hearing that men go through difficult times, and there's different approaches is great, right? So that's one thought. There's a good book. Hang on, I can never remember. I can't remember his name. James Hawes. Anyway, he's on LinkedIn. He's a sort of psychoanalyst, psychotherapist. He's written a really good book about being men and mental health, 10 keys for men's mental health, something like this. So that's if people want to sort of just dip the toe in to that side of things, that's a really nice book to read. And it, so much of it resonated with me, just sort of reading through it, about kind of anger, about emotional understanding, emotional expression, this kind of stuff. So that's really good. And then the other thing is, there's a growing world of men's circles, which are basically just men turning up, can be online, can be physically in the same space, and they, excuse me, they talk openly about their lives. And what is interesting, so I'm in one of these at the moment, what is interesting is not necessarily you share it, but you hearing other people's experiences really makes you think about your own experiences and gives you sort of different perspectives on them. So there's lots of different ways of going about things. Men's circles aren't going to be kind of offered by like the NHS or anything at the moment. Maybe in the future, who knows? But there's quite a lot of organisations increasingly doing these things. So there's just some thoughts there on that.
Yeah, there are loads of these circles. They're great. I know of really extreme ones. I say extreme ones. Let's say something like Andy's Man Club, where it's like everyone knows what they're there for, and then I've done a lot of talks with people where it's like they'll go camping or they'll go and some sort of wild thing like that, and those conversations naturally come up to some extent, and it's more a case of just a bit of a brotherhood, having male friends and sort of growing that way, which is, they are great. They are really good.
Yeah, great, good stuff. Good stuff.
You said that this is mainly, I get the most benefit out of it. That was the selfish reason that I started it. But one of my thought processes was, I always remember like going to the pub with maybe like 3 or 4 friends, and there'd be one friend that wouldn't say too much, but you could see that they were having a good time, and it was more a case of the fact that they were just able to listen and sort of be a part of it, and not like, you always have leaders in groups, right? And I think there are men like that would never say something. They would never say, I'm having this problem, but if they hear someone having the same problem or something very similar, they go, oh, okay, I've heard that. That's made me feel a bit better. What did they do? How did they do it? Not going to tell anyone, but they can get a bit of solace from that.
I think so. I think this is the value in this, and the sort of social media kind of world of promoting this stuff is that it is a bit of a silent sort of epidemic in a such. I guess one sort of story that sort of maybe highlights that is when I was telling colleagues kind of I've stopped doing the NHS work now, but I was sort of telling them I'm going to try and sort of move into this field. From time to time, someone would tell me a story a bit like this, which was basically, I was at a barbecue. This isn't my story, it's someone else's, but I was at a barbecue over the weekend, a few weekends ago, and we were having a nice chat, nice time with this guy, and everyone was having a nice time. And then on Monday, I heard that he killed himself, basically died by suicide, and that's quite kind of terrifying to me that sort of goes on. Basically, there's this sort of silent suffering. And the sharp end is that we have, whatever it is, 5,000 male suicides a year. God knows how many it is sort of worldwide, but that's the sort of sharp end is this sort of hidden issue is just ends in this. And it's not, if you look at the statistics, it's not changed in like 20 years, 30 years, just exactly the same numbers. And I find that quite kind of upsetting, that the only action that a man feels he has to do is to not be here anymore. And that's incredibly kind of upsetting. So this is why we need to sort of try and do this work. I guess
a nice segue into sort of where you are now and what you're doing now, I guess, because I think absolutely. We need more of this, and we need more of different things. So what is it that you do now?
Yeah, so I guess I do a mixture of things, really. So I do some bespoke things. So where men approach me with their issues, and I sort of work with them to come up with something that works for them. So that can be straightforward stuff around coaching for lifestyle changes, like we've talked about, just how you're going to get that exercise done, how are you going to eat healthily, specifically, or how you're going to cut down on your alcohol or whatever, this kind of stuff, right? Or so there's that element. There's sort of behavioural therapy type elements. So there's sort of looking at emotions, like why do I get angry all the time in this situation? There's sort of unpacking what that is, or even sort of traumatic events. If it feels safe to sort of unpack what's happened to them, and often it's sad, other men that they know have died by suicide. It's often a quite common theme, sadly. So there's things like that, and then there's also another element I offer is around looking at supplements and things like this. So often we're kind of deficient in various things, vitamin D, magnesium, various things that you can supplement and improve mental health, interestingly. So there's that. And then there's another arm, which is I do a bit of work with men with low testosterone. One of the symptoms of that is poor mental health. There's obviously sort of sexual symptoms as well, and physical things, so sort of low libido, losing muscle mass when you wouldn't expect to, or poor sleep, or things like that. So I do a couple of private clinics with that as well. So that's some of the stuff. There's a sort of smorgasbord of stuff. But I guess I have a program which is the Mind Compass, I call it, which is looking at 10 sort of. I give people a sort of questionnaire to fill in, but 10 main areas: sleep, stress, diet and gut health, substance use, purpose, meaning in life, medications, connection, sunlight, upbringing, movement, and finances tends to go into the sort of purpose bit. And I sort of score it all out of 5 really, and show people where they need to, where they might benefit from making efforts to change really. So it's just, I try and use sort of evidence-based approach. So all of the things I recommend have sort of scientific background to them all really, so I can sort of justify why we're using them. So it's a mixture of things. If people want to reach out, I do free initial consultations. So there's a form on the website, mensmindgp.com. Just pop on there, and I'm more than happy to have a chat with people. If people just like my thoughts on various things, there's a mailing list that you can sign up to on the same page. So so that's sort of what I kind of offer. And I know TRUUMAN, you do a few. You have got a few things as well. So do you want to just let us know what you're able to offer?
Yeah, well, I'd love to touch more on your sort of 10 points of your compass. TRUUMAN's got a similar vibe. It's an holistic approach, and it would just be interesting to see why you've chosen your ones. And I think, just to sort of you said, if people like what I say, that's the beauty of this space. I think men need to find someone that they resonate with, most definitely. I think that's what
That's it.
It's not a one.
And there's what's. Exactly. Yeah. So there's an increasing on LinkedIn, which I think is a great platform for this stuff. There's an increasing number of men generally talking about men's mental health and offering different solutions, which seem to fit better, as far as I understand, the reasons for men wanting, sort of accessing help and trying to change, basically. So the trick, I think, is absolutely, you've got to have a good relationship, but also whether that's actual, one-to-one discussion, or it's just a sort of more virtual kind of thing. So you've got to sort of trust that person or those people.
Yeah.
And then it has to be what you want it to be. There's no, like I was saying with the DTs, there's no point in offering stuff that people don't want to have, don't want to do. So it's really kind of you've got to find your path really. So offering a selection of stuff that men can resonate with and do something about. So I guess, why have I sort of gone through this for this sort of mechanism. So the general point, I think, is moving from what I call negative masculinity to positive masculinity, basically. So, and that's also what do I mean by it? So there was a paper. And the guys, it was written a few years ago now, but the main author was Ilyas Sagar Ugihagis in a 2018 paper. But it was about what is all the evidence saying about men's mental health? What is it? What works?
Yeah.
And basically, we have a fear. The kind of current model, which is what I guess inadvertently was doing, and I think a lot of men do, is all very negative. So it's stuff. So I've kind of there's 5 points really. One is boys don't cry. So this is the not telling of the stories. So hopefully we're addressing that to some degree today.
Yeah.
There's the I can sort it out myself, which is okay. So this is like you were saying. Actually, I can find ways through this. So this is it. But there's a sort of negative side that I can sort it out myself, which is you just like feel crap and you become paralyzed by just inertia and do nothing. And it's a sort of leave me alone call. There's definitely a knowledge gap. I don't get it. So this knowledge is power kind of thing. So if you don't understand how mental health works or health works generally, if you don't understand that exercising makes you feel better, then you may not do it. And then there's stuff about, as we said already, I'm not going to see the doctor, that kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with me. That kind of classic kind of response to someone
Ignorance
suggesting. Say that again.
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance. Well, I think so. It's sort of ignorance is hell, maybe. Yeah, but if you don't stop to consider that things can be different and that you have some autonomy, then you're just stuck in this sort of cycle, this negative cycle. Yeah. So my feeling was, okay, well, can we just turn all these around? So I kind of call this positive masculinity, really. So, excuse me, instead of boys don't cry, why not we say it's okay to share stories and talk about it? So we get role modeling and just being interested in other people's stories. So this is the men's circles kind of thing.
Yeah.
If we empower people with knowledge, so this is all the sort of stuff on LinkedIn or the stuff you can access via your service or my service, then people will understand. And if we understand, then you have a choice. Then you can say, well, okay, I know exercise makes me better. For example, I'll choose not to do it, or more likely, I will choose to do it. Just accepting that men maybe just because of whatever reason, social conditioning, physiology, whatever, just men are a bit different and they need different approaches, like we talked about. And this sort of positivity, you talked about, I can grow, I can develop, I can explore, and then I want to learn and I want to understand this sort of natural process. So I think that's what positive masculinity looks like for me, and from that sort of paper I mentioned. The Mind Compass, I guess that came out of partly, I did a diploma in what's called lifestyle medicine, which is basically looking at the science of all of the stuff that we've been talking about, and sort of derived the evidence questions to try and understand and look at things that we can change. So, you can change how much sleep you get by doing various things, going to bed at the same time, having good phone screen hygiene, you're turning off screens, things like this, getting early morning lights, not eating before, a couple of hours before bed, stopping your caffeine at midday, these kind of things, right? So and all of these different areas that I described, they've all got things that you can change. And if we change, we start to feel better, and then we change more things, and we start to feel better. And then actually there's this sort of, I was going to say, it's a magical thing that seems to happen is you feel great, and you actually kind of, I was going to say, you become sort of a better person, but you don't become that person. You're already that person. It's just, You've just put all this stuff in the way, and you're just getting rid of all the stuff that's stopping you being you, basically. So
it's reversing the
that's
spiral, right? You touched on it. You
yeah,
said it starts to
yeah,
compound as you're doing better. You go up, and
exactly,
it's the same
exactly.
going down.
Exactly. So we can and any anyone can do these things. Anyone can do a bit of exercise. Anyone can turn their phone off. There's nothing clever about this stuff.
Yeah,
There's people have done scientific studies, but it's nothing clever. It's just kind of obvious in a sense. But there's a difference between knowing and doing, and thinking you want to change and actually changing, and being honest with yourself, and or just ignoring everything. So this is what this process is about. It's about personal growth. It's about learning about yourself and being honest with yourself and being kind to yourself
yeah.
as well.
That's the key thing is the honesty side of it. I think for me, it's a case of you have to. I use the analogy when I first sort of was in this predicament was that I feel every man is falling off a cliff, and the bottom is not where
Oh
you
yeah,
want to. And I think from about the age of maybe even earlier, but let's say the official age of a man, 18, and social pressures and these sort of things kick in, I feel everyone starts falling. And I was going to ask you actually at what age you sort of had your epiphany, your breakdown, and then sort of those things happened. And
so I'm 44 now, so this is probably 39, something like this.
yeah,
And I think I like that idea that you're somehow falling. I think that's a good thought, and I think actually it's from birth. I think
yeah,
we're given, maybe even before birth actually. You're given, you get the scan done. Is it a boy or a girl? It's a boy. The room gets painted blue. The football, whatever jersey gets bought and whatever. It's you play football rather than going dancing or whatever. So all of this stuff is, and the language is all, you're strong or whatever, be a good boy or whatever, and actually it's all there. It's all put in. I remember just a slight aside, but I think it illustrates the point. I was in a park last year, and this little boy, he was about 3, fallen over, cut his knee, and his dad was there, and the boy was crying. I think he'd fallen off some swing or roundabout. And his dad's reaction was really interesting. His dad's reaction was shouting at him, "Don't cry! Just got more and more angry. Don't cry! Don't cry!" And of course, the boy was crying more and more. And for the mum, if it was his mum, would have got a completely different reaction.
yeah,
Have a hug. He would calm down. Off you go. Right. And okay, that's quite an extreme example. And I think in my head, what I'm picturing is when that dad was little, his dad used to hit him, shout at him, whatever, for crying, and maybe his dad used to hit, and this sort of so it carries on, and so there's this sort of shaping of masculinity in a negative way, I would say. There,
yeah,
quite normal to cry if you get hurt. That's quite a normal reaction. But equally, I've learnt that crying is almost impossible for me. I can tell you this. I just get this headache instead. I've learnt somehow to suppress crying in my body, a sort of automatic emotional response. I've learnt somehow to suppress it. It's very hard to undo that. So, yeah, that's some thoughts there. I don't know what you think about. I think about that.
yeah. I think it. Well, I think what I was sort of getting at is that you have to sort of throw this pickaxe out, and that's your stopping point, and then it depends where you're on, and that's your journey back up, right? But I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
like this is almost like a new age midlife crisis where people are sort
yes,
of having these like deep things that I imagine happened to my dad and my granddad and his dad, and they may have bought a Porsche, or they may have had an affair with the secretary. Like these are all normal things that would have happened as that sort of thing.
Mm.
I think now, because your male role model isn't necessarily just your father figure because of social
Mm.
media. Now, there's a negative side to this, don't get me wrong, but if you're able to consume content in a sensible way and like
Mm.
have a more holistic approach to people and take little bits from everyone, you can shape yourself into a different man, most definitely. And I think
Mm.
that's what I feel is happening now, is like people are having these sort of like, there's a big break in their life for one reason or another, and I think it's taking them away from traditional masculinity and traditional role models and their father and their father's father and father's father. That's what I think is sort of happening now, which, as long as more people are having a positive one, that's going to be good. There's obviously negative sort of breaks as well, right? And it's like trying to
Yeah.
change that narrative, because you had suicidal thoughts, I've had suicidal thoughts. A lot of the people that I've spoken to have either attempted or had suicidal thoughts. And
Mm.
rather than going through with the suicide option, it was a case of, what can I do to not do that? And that's created a completely different pathway. And that for me is really interesting and really powerful. And yeah, that's my view on it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's very. I mean, it's very sad, isn't it? Feels like you have to get to that point before you try something different. And I've never quite worked out the answer to this, because it would be a lot easier just, having, being healthfully kind of brought up and having these values kind of instilled that, it's okay to be yourself and this kind of stuff, right? I don't know. I wonder whether it's partly necessary. Maybe this is just a normal human experience. It's written into all of our story structures, isn't it? Sort of hero's journey kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or the other one where it all kind of collapses into a big mess at the end, or whatever. So the I guess that's maybe it's just part of being a human being. But I guess, yes, we do. I guess one of the difficulties, as you touched on, is what is, I guess, what you're supposed to, what is being a man? It's sort of become quite vague, and can be very difficult to understand. What, if your role changes all the time, or if I don't know, you haven't got a relationship, or you're divorced, or whatever, these things that make you kind of question things. I think one of the things is definitely work roles is very, very challenging. A lot of work roles are going to disappear or change in nature, and whether you have to sort of be up for this sort of constant challenge, almost this sort of, and whether that's tolerable or not, I don't know. One of the more I read something in a book called by Yuval Harari. He wrote a book called Humans, but he also wrote a book about the future of humanity. I think it's called 21st Century Humans or something. I can't remember. But he said one of those things he was talking about, in the future, a lot of men, it's about 15-20% of men, their main access to employment will be being a cleaner, because that's just going to be the only opportunity available to them. There's nothing wrong with that, but equally, that could feel quite demasculating. That could feel like, I'm not a worthwhile person, or whatever, or you could easily interpret yourself in that lens. So there's this constant sort of battle about what we've been told, what we should expect, how do we exist in the world. So yeah, it's a very difficult challenge. Very difficult challenge.
It's a really nice sort of point to just sort of get me onto my sort of final question, I guess, which is, what's next for the men's space, and
Ooh. What is next? That is a good question. I think well, okay. The biggest problem, I mean, we've talked about this for being a man and being autonomous and always, sort of solving your own problems, all this kind of stuff, and whatever, seeking help. I think the biggest problem is still going to be this sort of socioeconomic one. So if you're in the lowest sort of group of earners, you more likely to, there's this sort of slide, unfortunately, that men go through, which is lose job, lose money, lose relationship, lose house, unemployed, alcohol, drug addict, suicide. It's a sort of thing that unfortunately kind of occurs. And you're much more likely for that to happen where you have a sort of fragile work situation, or you have very little money or reserves or whatever. And I think there's a sort of societal level problem there where that needs to be addressed. We need to be able to help people in those situations in ways that are acceptable to them. I know I know that there's and I've forgotten the name of them, so I would give them a shout out. But there's an organisation in the Northeast that does basic stuff like this. They do kind of men's circles, men's groups that kind of combine a bit of this sort of working with a bit of support in other ways, sort of job support or whatever. So you're trying to make kind of communities and things like that. So I think if as always, if you were to try and target your energies effectively, that would be the area to target. I know the government have taken on a men and boys kind of role. Mark Brooks on LinkedIn's very good at talking about this stuff. So that's probably where I would try and put the efforts if I had some control over these things. Do you have an opinion on this, on Lewis?
Yeah, it was really simple. More of me, more of you. Just more people openly talking. I think the more stories that are shared, the better it will be. The easier it will be to draw parallels. And because I've sort of grown up in a world of David Goggins and like those people being like, you go through adversity and then you run 200 miles. And I don't think that is the result that everyone wants or needs. And I think if we can get some more real life stories shared, I think that will help people a lot, because that's sort of what I think is needed. I think I think also you're right. I think for me, this is the most beautiful time to be a man. Like, you can be anything and everything, but I think that also has its own pressures of like, now you have to do everything and be everything. And I think that'll change over time, where people will start to fall into their areas naturally, as we have done for centuries. It just sort of naturally dissipates that way. But new roles and new ideas of manhood are changing. So just more acceptance of that and more changes towards that. So paternity and maternity, there's going to be more stay-at-home dads, and they're going to want that option. So that's probably something that would need looking at from a governmental point of view. But the options are there, and it's just a case of being more accepting of them, I think, would be my
brilliant. No, absolutely great.
Ed, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. It's absolutely flown by, which is always a good sign.
Yeah.
I will leave the final thoughts with you if you want to remind people where to find you or anything that you want to end on. But thanks once again.
Yeah, thank you, Lewis. So thanks for having me on. Men's Mind GP is my website, mensmindgp.com. You can get on the mailing list or get on, if you want a free consultation, just contact me there. Edward Rainbow on LinkedIn. I try and post every day about something that's helpful about mental health. I guess the main message though is if you're struggling, if you're listening to this, and you're struggling, you're not on your own, and there's a way through it, and it can be any way. There's not a right way. Like Lewis said, is you can try and change things yourself. If you want to seek a bit of help from me, Lewis, whoever, that's equally fine. If you feel like you're going to end it all, then there's people you can reach out to. The Samaritans are there, or you don't have to. You don't have to kind of suffer alone. I guess that's the thing. So good luck to everyone out there. Take care, and thank you, Lewis, again for having me on.
Thank you.